They swore an oath to uphold the law, but they broke it for greed. Men who once hunted drug lords, now locked beside them. Behind the badge, they built secret empires of power, money, and betrayal. These aren't street criminals or cartel bosses. These are agents of the Drug Enforcement Administration, the very institution meant to protect the United States from narcotics and corruption. But sometimes the rot doesn't come from the outside. Sometimes it grows from within. These are the 10 most corrupt DEA agents ever convicted in U.S. history. Men who turned justice into business and power into poison. Jose Ismael Irizarry. Born in Puerto Rico, Jose Ismael Irizarry joined the DEA with a reputation for charm and ambition. Fluent in Spanish and bold under pressure, he became one of the agency's most trusted undercover agents in Latin America. But beneath that confidence was greed waiting for a chance to breathe. Assigned to operations across Colombia and Panama, Irizarry handled millions in DEA funds used to track drug money. He soon realized how easily those accounts could be manipulated, and how nobody questioned him. With a Colombian partner, he siphoned nearly $9 million, disguising it as legitimate transfers from sting operations. Luxury cars, designer clothes, yacht parties. Irizarry lived like the traffickers he once pursued. For years, he moved through the agency like a ghost of integrity. But in 2017, internal auditors uncovered suspicious transactions tied to his cases. The trail led straight to him. Arrested in 2020, he pled guilty to money laundering, wire fraud, and identity theft. Prosecutors called his scheme a stain on the DEA's badge. In December 2021, he was sentenced to 145 months in prison, nearly 12 years behind bars. He had chased the world's drug lords until he became one. But Irizarry was only the beginning, because in New Orleans, another agent twisted the law into his own weapon. Next, Chad Allen Scott. Born in Louisiana, Chad Allen Scott grew up chasing power. By the time he joined the DEA, he'd made himself a legend. Loud, fearless, and ruthless. Leading the New Orleans task force, he commanded fear from both criminals and fellow officers. But behind the badge, he was rewriting justice to serve himself. Scott stole cash from suspects, planted evidence, and forced informants to lie under oath. He framed rivals and covered his tracks with falsified reports. For years, his success hid his crimes until small inconsistencies began to surface. Files didn't match. Money vanished. People started talking. In 2016, the FBI began investigating. They uncovered years of deceit, perjury, obstruction, theft, and fabricated evidence. Scott was indicted in 2017, and the courtroom that once respected him turned against him. Fellow agents testified that he bullied them, falsified documents, and ruled through fear. In 2021, he was sentenced to 13 years in federal prison. Every case he'd ever handled came under review, dozens overturned, countless reputations destroyed. The man who thought he was the law discovered how fast justice bites back. But New Orleans wasn't the end, because up north, another DEA agent wasn't falsifying cases. He was taking money from the traffickers themselves. Next, Nathan Cohen. Born in Arkansas, Nathan Cohen built his DEA career on discipline and quiet control. As a supervisory special agent in Little Rock, he managed major narcotics investigations and earned respect as a strategist. But his calm professionalism masked something darker. He was for sale. By 2018, whispers began. A known drug trafficker was moving freely, untouched by raids. Investigators traced phone calls, transactions, and messages, and the name that surfaced was Cohen's. He'd been accepting bribes, leaking intel, and warning dealers of upcoming operations. The FBI and the DEA's Office of Inspector General followed the money. Unexplained deposits, encrypted communications, and cash handed off in parking lots. In one sting, Cohen accepted $9,000 from an undercover informant posing as a trafficker. It was all on camera. He was arrested in 2019 and later pled guilty to bribery of a public official. Prosecutors described his crimes as a cancer inside law enforcement. In May 2022, Cohen was sentenced to 135 months in federal prison, just over 11 years. Once he stood at the top of the DEA's chain of command. Now he's a lesson whispered to every rookie agent. The higher you climb, the further you fall. But Cohen's betrayal was about money. In Miami, another agent sold something far worse: secrets. Next, John Costanzo Jr. Born into a family of law enforcement, John Costanzo Jr. was raised on integrity. His father, a retired agent, passed down the badge with pride. In Miami, Costanzo became the image of professionalism, calm, respected, and connected. But reputation became currency, and he knew how to spend it. Costanzo leaked DEA intelligence to defense lawyers representing drug traffickers. He sold sealed case information, surveillance details, even the timing of raids. The leaks weren't random. They were orchestrated through an old friend, Manuel Manny Recio, a retired DEA supervisor. Together, they built a network of corruption hidden behind polished smiles and consulting fees. The FBI tracked their communications and payments, uncovering messages that match perfectly with compromised cases. In 2019, both men were indicted for bribery and honest services wire fraud. At trial, prosecutors called them partners in betrayal. Their actions, they said, had jeopardized years of investigations and endangered undercover agents. In April 2024, Costanzo was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, ratio to 3. The judge called it a breach of trust that cut to the heart of justice. Costanzo once carried a legacy. Now his name sits among the men who sold it. But Ratio wasn't just his partner. He was the architect, the mentor who taught loyalty and traded it for greed. Next, Manuel Manny Ratio. For decades, Manuel Manny Ratio was a legend inside the DEA's Miami office. As an assistant special agent in charge, he trained young investigators, led critical operations, and commanded respect. But when he retired, he didn't leave the game. He changed sides. Ratio knew the system inside out. Which cases were sealed, which lawyers represented which traffickers, and which agents could be compromised. From his new consulting business, he began connecting defense attorneys with insider DEA information, intelligence worth fortunes in Miami's underworld. To keep it running, he turned to his protege, John Costanzo Jr. Ratio paid him for every secret he leaked, sealed warrants, surveillance plans, names of informants. Together, they sabotaged investigations and traded justice for cash. The FBI caught them through phone taps and money trails disguised as business expenses. In October 2019, both were arrested and charged with bribery and honest services fraud. Prosecutors called Ratio's betrayal a lifetime of service sold in pieces. In May 2024, he was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. The mentor who once hunted traffickers had become one of them, proving that greed doesn't retire when the badge does. But Miami's rot didn't end there, because in New York, another agent's corruption came with blood and broken teeth. Next, Dustin Jenko. Born and raised in upstate New York, Dustin Jenko grew up with dreams of serving his country through law enforcement. As a task force officer assigned to the DEA, he was proud to wear the badge, a symbol of authority he swore to honor. But one violent decision would undo everything he stood for. In 2016, Jenko joined a team executing a search warrant in Rochester. The suspect was already handcuffed, calm, and compliant. Yet in a sudden flash of anger, Jenko struck him hard across the face, splitting his lip and breaking teeth. The assault, silent and swift, was caught on camera. Afterward, Jenko falsified his report, claiming the suspect had resisted arrest. A lie meant to bury the truth. For years, the incident sat hidden in paperwork, unseen and unquestioned. Until in 2023, a whistleblower surfaced. The Department of Justice reviewed the footage, frame by frame, and the truth was undeniable. In February of 2024, Jenko was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law and falsification of records. He was convicted and sentenced to 3 months in federal prison. His punishment was brief, but the damage was lasting. Jenko hadn't stolen money or leaked secrets. His crime was simpler and more human. He turned power into violence. But New York's corruption didn't end with brutality, because another agent there was trading something else entirely: protection. Next, Fernando Gomez. Fernando Gomez grew up in the Bronx, surrounded by the kind of crime he'd later swear to fight. A decorated NYPD detective turned a DEA agent, he was street smart, tough, and respected. But over time, that street sense twisted into greed, and loyalty became currency. By 2017, Gomez was no longer chasing traffickers. He was helping them. Using his badge as cover, he leaked DEA intelligence to a cocaine ring operating out of New York and the Dominican Republic. He supplied them with guns, warned them before raids, and sold them information about ongoing investigations. The results were disastrous. Raids failed, suspects vanished, investigations collapsed overnight. When federal agents realized operations were being sabotaged from within, they quietly began to trace the leaks. Every trail led back to Gomez, Wiretaps and surveillance confirmed the truth. He wasn't an investigator anymore. He was a collaborator. Arrested in 2019, Gomez was charged with conspiracy to distribute cocaine, obstruction of justice, and firearms offenses. In 2020, he pled guilty and was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Prosecutors said he endangered every honest agent who trusted him. Fernando Gomez didn't just sell secrets. He sold safety. But not all betrayal came from the field. In Washington, another man's deceit involved no drugs at all, just lies and the power of reputation. Next, Garrison Kenneth Courtney. Born in Florida, Garrison Kenneth Courtney wasn't a field man. He was polished, articulate, and ambitious, the kind who thrived behind podiums and in press briefings. As the DEA's chief of public affairs, he became the agency's voice. But when he left that position, he built a new identity, one made entirely of fiction. Between 2012 and 2016, Courtney pretended to be a covert CIA operative running classified missions. He approached private contractors, claiming he needed help funding secret operations too sensitive to document. In return, he promised lucrative government contracts once the mission was complete. He forged letters, faked email chains, even impersonated officials to make his story believable. Over 4 years, he collected more than $4.4 million, which he used to pay debts and maintain his illusion of power. The scam unraveled in 2016 when one contractor tried to verify his CIA credentials. There was no record, no mission, no cover identity. The lie collapsed instantly. In June 2020, Courtney was arrested and charged with wire fraud. He pled guilty and was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, ordered to repay his victims. He hadn't stolen drugs or taken bribes. He'd stolen belief itself. The man once trusted to tell the DA's story had turned his voice into his weapon. But while Washington's deception faded, another form of rot was spreading up north, where loyalty to traffickers became stronger than loyalty to the law. Next, Joseph Bongiovanni. Born in Buffalo, New York, Joseph Bongiovanni grew up in the shadow of his father, a respected police officer. From the start, he seemed destined to follow the badge with the same pride, and for a while he did. But years on the job blurred the lines between justice and profit. As a DEA agent, Bongiovanni met local traffickers through investigations. He began passing along small pieces of information. A warning here, a delay there. Over time, those favors became payments. He was no longer investigating the drug trade. He was protecting it. By 2018, federal operations in Buffalo began collapsing. Suspects always seemed one step ahead. The FBI and the Justice Department's Inspector General launched a covert probe. They uncovered hidden meetings, unexplained deposits, and encrypted communications with traffickers. In 2019, Bongiovanni was arrested and charged with bribery, obstruction of justice, and false statements. At trial, prosecutors revealed how he derailed investigations and shielded drug lords for years. In October 2024, a federal jury found him guilty on all counts. He faces up to 20 years in federal prison at sentencing. Bongiovanni's corruption didn't explode overnight. It grew slowly. One decision, one secret, one lie at a time. But his betrayal wasn't an exception, because the pattern began years earlier, with a man who made the DEA's darkest chapter possible. Next, Karl Mark Force IV, born in Maryland. Karl Mark Force IV joined the DEA in the 1990s with a reputation for sharp instincts and digital savvy, a rare mix in a world still learning to police the internet. By the early 2000s, he was part of the elite team assigned to infiltrate the Silk Road, the dark web marketplace that had become the global capital of online drug trade. But in chasing cyber criminals, Force crossed the same line he was sworn to defend. Operating undercover, he created secret personas to communicate with Ross Ulbricht, the Silk Road's founder known online as Dread Pirate Roberts. What began as an investigation quickly became extortion. Force demanded Bitcoin in exchange for inside information, warning Ulbricht of fake threats while secretly selling him fabricated intelligence. He pocketed digital currency from the case, moving it through hidden wallets and offshore accounts. When internal audits found missing cryptocurrency, suspicions turned inward. The FBI traced unusual blockchain transactions and encrypted messages back to Force's devices. The digital trail told a story of betrayal, a federal agent who had turned the government's own investigation into a side hustle. In March 2015, he was arrested and charged with money laundering, obstruction of justice, and extortion. He pled guilty, admitting he'd stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoin from the very criminals he was supposed to catch. In October 2015, Karl Mark Force IV was sentenced to 78 months in federal prison, just over 6 years, in order to forfeit all illicit gains. He once hunted digital outlaws. Now he became their cautionary tale. His fall proved a timeless truth. Technology may evolve, but greed never does. From Irizarry's millions to Bongiovanni's secrets, these men shared one thing. They all believed the badge could hide anything, but in the end it didn't. The badge only magnified what they truly were. 10 men, 10 badges, 10 stories that remind us. Corruption doesn't begin with crime. It begins with choice. They wore the same uniform as the heroes they betrayed, and in the end, it wasn't the criminals who destroyed them. It was themselves. If this story gripped you, hit like, drop a comment, and tell us which case shocked you most. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Because in the world of power and deception, we've only just begun.